Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to this special edition of the LCI Green Room, as well as we're multi-streaming as well to Mark channel, the Knocked Conscious podcast, and we're on week 2 of the Scott Horton Provoked Book Club. Very excited to be diving into this book. I feel like I've read 5 books already, and we're not even halfway through this thing. It's absolutely insane. I don't know how you two talked me into this, because this is just crazy to try to read this much content all at once, but I'm also loving it at the same time. I'm learning so much, and I'm so excited to be on this journey with all of you guys to try to get these ideas out in front of as many people as possible. As we've said over the last couple of these, that it's really important. Like, we're living in very crazy times right now, and this book, I know it took Scott a long time. It was a labor of love, and it came out I would say a little bit of divine providence. It couldn't have come out at a better time, where people are ready to receive it, and the importance of the message and this information is very necessary. I'm, of course, joined, again, already said, Mark from the Knocked Conscious podcast. We got Shawn in his full glory today. The feds are no longer disabling his video. He's not hiding out in a bunker anymore like he was last week. So we're all good there. And then, of course, I'm Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast at the Libertarian Institute. And those who follow me should be very familiar with our special guest tonight, because I've had him on. Man, I think I've had you on at least maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, Kyle. I've lost count. But Kyle Anzalone, he is, I forget all your official positions. I know you do stuff for the Libertarian Institute and have your own new podcast that you just launched, the Kyle Anzalone Show, as well as still doing conflicts of interest. Kyle, go ahead and reintroduce yourself for those who know you and don't know you.
Yeah. So I am the opinion editor at antiwar.com, which probably makes me somewhat qualified for our discussion today, because that, of course, was the job that Scott Horton had before he became editorial director of antiwar.com. And I slid into the opinion editor slot, which means I do the viewpoints for the website, hit the spotlight article every day over there. And that's, part of the reason why I just stay so in touch with foreign policy is because we're reading Scott did before me, and now I do just so much content from all over the place. And I'm now, after having done this job for a few years, kind of not surprised that his book is as thorough and as detailed as it is, because he did that job for well over a decade, I think like 15 years. And so just the amount that he learned doing that job, plus everything, all the research, doing the book and everything, it's absolutely incredible. And then I also work for Scott over at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor, and people often find my news stories also on the top half of the page at antiwar.com. And then I'm the host of a brand new show, the Kyle Anzalone Show. It's a kind of high production show that I'm doing, got a producer, really happy with the quality so far. There'll be a new show out either tomorrow evening or Wednesday morning. So subscribe to the channel for that. And then I also host my show that I've been doing for some time now, Conflicts of Interest.
Right on. I know you also, I think, was it Scott Horton's show you were just on to talk about the conflict in Syria?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I got to say, guys, I actually read the first section of this book along with you guys for the first show, because I knew I signed up for the second. I didn't want to fall behind or else it was going to be an absolute beast. And reading the first section in the past week was absolutely crazy and infuriating. This is a history book, right? Yeah. But at the same time that this is a history book, it's a massive warning. Right. So, Jacob, we're supposed to start today's section on page 85. And actually, on the top half of that page, Scott is issuing a warning about ungrateful terrorists. And I'm sure you talked about the Bosnian war on the last show, so we don't have to get into it. But just that we helped out terrorists in a war and it came out to blow up in our face. And, you guys are reading this. Scott's book's coming out with this right at the same time that we have this terrorist bat movement in Syria that's backed by the United States seizing power. I mean, what a more important warning to be gained from Scott Horton. Like, hey, yeah, we just bat these people seizing power, but this could still absolutely blow up in our face.
And it will.
Yeah.
It will.
I think you were looking for the word cautionary tale, I think is what.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, well said, Kyle. I mean, this book is history, but it's absolutely prophetic in a way in terms of talking about what's going on, even in the current news cycle. And we brought this point up last week where I said, I know that there's that saying that history repeats itself, but I think that most people think that means like, oh, every like couple decades, right? Or every 50 years or 100 years, not like, hey, every like 6 to 12 months, the same pattern of U.S. foreign policy and interventionism is just fully on display. I mean, but there's a reason that used to be part of Dave Smith's intro, right? Like, if you want to know who America's next enemy is, just look at who we're funding now. And I mean, I don't know if that's 100% true, but it's got to be at least 99.99% accurate as a heuristic to predict, which means, I guess, Ukraine. And I mean, I don't know, I guess maybe 99.9%. Well, I guess it would be, because I would view Israel, at least their government, and Ukraine and their government as sort of the enemies of America, even though they're buddy-buddy with people in the top positions of our government. But we could go on for current events and all sorts of stuff, but we're here to talk about starting with shock therapy tonight. So just to recap people last week, if you missed it, week 1, we covered the beginning of the book, which was the end of the Cold War, and then brought it up through the Bush senior administration to the beginning of the Clinton administration, talked about some of the consequences of the Bosnian War, and we're going to get more into Clinton and his policies, and Mark is going to kick us off by summarizing this first section. So, Mark, take it away.
Actually, it's me.
Oh, Shawn, sorry.
The guy who's got a camera this week. And let me
Yes.
first start by saying I really apologize about last week. I really don't know what happened. My stuff just didn't want to work. And then to boot, as soon as we got off the show, my whole computer just crashed. I lost everything. It was wild, dude. So I'm glad to just have it back. My wife did it all by herself, bless her heart, because I'm a tech tard. I don't know how to deal with this stuff. I can click buttons and get online and shit, but that's about it. So, kudos to her for doing that. But for real, like, I lost all my editing stuff for my show and everything. It's gone. It's back now, thanks to her. But, many apologies. Thank you for, sticking with it and stuff like that. But let's just get into it. We talked about last week a little bit, how the origins of the war happened and stuff, and promises that were made and promises that were broken. And then little did I know when I was taking over this piece, because I'm reading it week by week. I'm not just like reading far ahead. I need it fresh in my mind. It's just something I need to do for myself, because I need it like there. I can't just go and try to remember stuff. The fact that I picked up the part that had, the economy in there was perfect, because I'm big on econ, huge on econ and money, monetary system, banking system, stuff like that. So this was absolutely great to read this section, actually. So let's just get it started right now. Shock therapy. Shock therapy was really just an economic, I don't know what word I'm looking for. It was a form of economics that the West, the United States, thought they were going to, quote unquote, help the Russian economy, offering privatization. That was a big word. They kept saying privatization. But what really ended up happening was, let me grab my notes here, was a group of brats from Harvard. They actually, they call them the Harvard Boys, led by the Undersecretary of Treasury Larry Summers, World Bank economist Andre Schleifer. If I sabotage these names, I sabotage them. Sorry, y'all. Let's see. Schleifer, rival professor Jeffrey Sachs. That was easy. Along with David Lipton, Andres Aslan, Jonathan Hay, and Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin came up with a plan to help the Russian economy by coming up with a bunch of grants, right? It was just one of those things where we're going to come up with these grants. We're going to help them out. Really, in theory, it was a way to destroy their economy. And we'll go into that a little bit more. So all that being said, they come through. Al Gore led the charge on that, by the way. And this all leads to inflation that the U.S. Essentially had to bail them out on. So the U.S. gets involved with Russian monetary system, prints a bunch of money on the Russians' behalf to, quote unquote, save them, which of course causes some inflation. And by some inflation, we're talking 2,500%, according to the book, which totally buried the Russian economy. It was bad. Like they buried them. People didn't know what to do. It was in bad shape. Other than the oligarchies, that were up top, people were screwed. And after that, they try to say everything should be privatized from there. In the meantime, Mr. Murray Rothbard, my favorite economist of all time. Look at the flag behind me. I'm a Rothbardian big time. He's screaming, hey, privatize everything. But Russia kind of kept their hands on the price controls. They kind of let some go, but they also kept some intact, which, and by the way, they continued to print more money, which turned into an absolute disaster. So those boys from Harvard, along with the U.S., the West, or whatever you want to call them, because there's a bunch of different names in the book at this point. It's either U.S., it's the West, whatever it may be. The U.S. is involved no matter what. They come up with this voucher system, right? And so this voucher system, oh, by the way, we got to throw this name in there. And if I sabotage it, I'm so sorry. Anatoly Chubais. Did I get that right, Kyle?
Oh, don't ask me. I just read these things. I don't. You have to go and listen to it, and usually you're gonna get like some BBC anchor saying it in a British accent, so it's only partially helpful. But you're probably close enough.
So Anatoly Chubais, with the advice from those Harvard boys, come up with a voucher program to give $10,000 in rubles, in vouchers. I'm sorry, $10,000 worth of vouchers in rubles to every Russian to invest in these brand new companies, right? Well, the problem is Russia kind of had a lock on the companies that you could invest in and not invest in. And the ones that were worth a damn kind of were off limits. So then these people ended up investing in these companies down in the Arctic Circle, right? And let me see where I'm at here. Oh, let's see. Yes. So they ended up investing in these companies way down in the Arctic Circle. That didn't matter. They didn't mean anything. These people were getting screwed from the top all the way to the bottom. And here we are saying, hey, we're helping. Of course we're helping. Anytime the United States helps, especially here in America, you know what I'm saying? Their help always leads into something not so great. So this was the U.S.'s plan all along. They really wanted to cripple the Russian economy. They did not want to help them, and this goes back to the broken promises from before, when they said, hey, we're not going to move anywhere more east, and then they moved into East Germany, and then it was a little bit more and a little bit more. Next thing you know, they're in Poland and the Czech Republic and Hungary. You know what I mean? So this is just another way to screw the Russians, like I'll keep saying this a million times during this show. This book is called Provoked for a reason. Okay. So next on the agenda, Professor Janine Weddle wrote in 1996 calling out the Clinton administration on the voucher program, a way to prop up Chubais, which was true when the CIA warned Gore of how corrupt Chubais was. Gore called bullshit on that, which Gore later came out and said, I wasn't right about that. Isn't that something? So let's get back to 1993. 1993 was an important year because there was another coup, or at least they tried to do it again. So they tried to get Yeltsin out again, but they were responded with great force and power, and he gained his power back by overthrowing the people who tried to get him out. He brought the military in, he brought tanks. He said, no, I'm not going anywhere. This is how it's going to be. I'm staying put. This is what it is. Sorry, not sorry, pretty much. This is Yeltsin, who loves to drink, by the way. So let's go to Davos. At this point, Yeltsin had a 6% approval rating because of how bad everything went with the voucher program and everything else that the U.S. kind of helped with. And the writing was on the wall. Yeltsin was on his way out. They were going to boot him and say la vie. We'll see you later, homie, because this isn't working out. Well, during that Davos, which at the time was called the Global Economic Forum, not the World Economic Forum, which is kind of funny. But anyways, he makes a deal with the oligarchs to support his reelection for exchange on a loan for shares program to screw the people once again. This is how he got reelected. And now this is where I feel like anything that has to do with Ukraine, I'm just going to read it from the book because that's the only way to do it justice. Let me just make messing with you. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to fill the time while you were getting it up, but if you're ready, then go for it.
I'm ready to go. So messing with Ukraine. And I will always read when it says Ukraine in the main title. I'm going to read it because that's important, because obviously this is what this is all about. In July 1997, NATO and Ukraine signed the Charter on Distinctive Partnership with promises to develop relations and broaden and strengthen their cooperation in the Western Alliance. Though they said that no state should pursue its security at its expense of that of another state, this evidently was a reference to Russia's presumed wish to prevent such association rather than any sort of recognition of their concerns. It is also promised the beginning of planning to work towards NATO Ukraine military operation interoperably, as well as military training under, oh my goodness, what a word, Scott. Thank you for this. Auspices of the PFP, the Partnership for Peace, which is what we talked about last week, a purgatory for countries like Russia to be good little soldiers and hang out and conform until they can be let into NATO. In August, U.S. and Turkish warships held a week-long joint exercise named Sea Breeze 97, which involved troops from Ukraine, Georgia, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, and the United States. Russian Defense Minister Igor Sergeyev denounced the exercises while deputies in the parliament threatened to leave the PFP. They were going to have the Marines land in Crimea. Parliament threatened, to practice intervening in an ethnic conflict. The Los Angeles Times reported that the theoretical events were taken as NATO warning to the Kremlin of what could happen if it sought to recover Crimea. This caused an immediate reaction from Russians, so the U.S. altered the scenario to earthquake relief. Thousands of demonstrators still turned out to protest. What they saw was a show of force against Russia. The Times noted that what was intended to enhance Ukraine's military preparedness may actually hurt security by provoking new problems with Russia. Yeltsin complained about this training in his meeting with Clinton in March of 1997, saying that you are conducting naval maneuvers near Crimea. It is as if we were training people in Cuba. How would you feel? It is unacceptable to us. We are not going out to seize Sevastopol. Dude, think about that for a minute. They started it back then. That was the hard stop, was Ukraine, which has been the hard stop this entire time. And here we are in 1997, and they're playing these games back then. So yeah. Please tell me how Russia's the bad guy.
Well, isn't it so frustrating? Like Scott's on a couple debates now, and I think in each debate, the people he's been talking to are like, well, Russia didn't care about NATO expansion in the 90s and the 2000s, and didn't care and didn't care about and only cared about Ukraine because of I don't know, like, evil boogeyman Putin wants to, recreate the USSR. But like, we're not even past the Clinton stage of this yet, and we already see that, Yeltsin has multiple times gone to Clinton and talked and complained and said, hey, like, what are you guys doing? This is making it kind of difficult for me to, sell this idea of America and Russia being friendly, sell the idea of us trying to pursue Western values and Western democracy. And I wonder, like, you said, Shawn, I want to get Kyle to comment on this, like, that it's just because they're trying to, like, I guess, like, a sort of like they wanted to screw over Russia economically. But I don't know, like, I guess part of it's that, but isn't it also partly just like, even when maybe they were trying to be helpful, they're just too stupid to know how to, like, properly implement free markets, because, this is Bill Clinton and the Bill Clinton administration, and they're not implementing free markets even back home in America.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that is a part of it. Although if you read this chapter and kind of look at how it plays out, it's very hard to see the quote unquote privatization of the Russian economy as being anything other than a giant corruption scheme that was aided and abetted by the United States. And with the corruption just being so obvious, I think it's very hard to argue that they must not have assumed that they were intentionally weakening the Russian economy in the Russian state, in the Russian future, and that was a good thing, right? And Scott gets into that, and it gets a little bit more explicit in later sections of this chapter when they're talking about the pipelines in the Caspian Sea and how the U.S. is even less concerned about making money than they are about making sure that Russia doesn't make money. And so I'm sure that's a part of all of this. But at the same time, I think, just so much corruption going on, being willing to profit off of that corruption, and at the same time, not caring about the Russian people. When I first started at antiwar.com, I would often email Scott questions. And I remember one of the first questions I emailed him, and I couldn't believe it. I read this and I checked it, and I was like, this just doesn't seem right to me. So, Scott will know the answer. He'll know, like, who's debunked this. And that was that the situation in Russia actually got worse after the fall of the USSR. Just being a libertarian, you assume that after a country gets prices, that the situation is going to get marginally better, right? I'm not saying that, you instantly go from communism to utopia and that free markets just take off. Never thought that. You just assume that, the average life expectancy goes up a little bit because, prices in the healthcare sector help you determine, where to send, and have doctors and medical care and all these kinds of things that you assume would happen. Actually, the life expectancy in Russia dipped. The outlook for Russians, the alcoholism skyrocketed, suicide skyrocketed, right? The people there were miserable. Their lives were terrible. They had no opportunities whatsoever. And again, it's just very hard to see how the Americans were not intentionally aware that was going on and we're okay with it. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout this entire show, but I think, two threads that are really important in this entire chapter we're talking about today, but particularly are important in the first section, is we see the losing of the Russian people. After the fall of the USSR, there was a real opportunity for the Americans to come in and look, I support, and I'm sure as all of you guys do, the Rothbard plan. We privatize, we let the Russian people work it out, rather than this incremental privatization that is set up in a way that fleeces the individual Russian people. When they get the waivers, there's nothing good on the market, so they trade away their waivers, believing that they're never going to get anything for them. And then then they put the good stuff on the market when only the people who had capital and the ability to hang in there, and they were able to get everything. And so, this fleecing of the Russian people really loses the Russian people in respect to the Americans. And even had we followed the Jeffrey Sachs plan, which isn't a libertarian plan, but at least that seemed to aim to actually help the Russian people, where what we ended up with, the Harvard boys, the partial kind of odd shop therapy that they implemented in Russia, and just how everything was stolen, all the capital was stolen, and so much of it went to completely unuseful places. It was just horrific what happened to the Russian people there. And then there's just one little part in this section that I thought was really key here. Scott writes, murder, suicides, a broken healthcare and pension system, massive alcoholism and drug abuse, Yeltsin's hyperinflation and gangster state destroyed Russia. Just imagine the fall of the communist regime and Marxist economy, leading to lowering the life expectancy by more than 6 years. That's the reality of the result of the corruption and bad faith of the neoliberal economic advisors Bill Clinton sent to Russia, their bosses back home, and their family of criminals they support in power. And Scott, by the way, in the book estimates hundreds of billions of dollars, 9 figures, that, a number with 8 zeros behind it, stolen from Russia in dollars, not in rubles, in dollars, stolen from Russia during this period. That's absolutely unreal.
Didn't the life expectancy, I forget, for either the entire population or for men, drop below 60? Like, wasn't it like 57 or 58 or something? I mean, that's just insane. Like, it's just hard to fathom.
And like 5 million people died over that time.
Right. Yes.
So what I found really interesting about the one part of that, if I just may jump in for 1 second, was they initially had it sell off all the assets and then like burn that money. So that would solve the inflation part and start privatizing. And then they totally did the opposite. They sold it kind of and then kept it in circulation. And it just created even more hyper inflation over time.
Well, yeah, there was two different, like there was the initial 2,500% inflation that went up. And then I can't remember. I can't see it in my notes, but there was something else that happened in between there where inflation went up like another 36%, which made it even worse. You know what I'm saying? And then there was, I left out a big part between Jeffrey Sachs and the U.S. government. The government was trying to pin Sachs, saying that he was, he pulled this voucher program to prop up Shubis or whatever. And he's going back saying, no, it was you guys. This was your economic plan. And so it turned into like this big, he said, she said thing. And at the end of the day, Russians suffered. That's just what happened, which led us into the Rambouillet, if I'm saying that right, which was the disaster in Kosovo. Economic hardships cause desperate times, cause for desperate measures, and the people of Kosovo, I mean, that goes far beyond, economic stuff, because, there was Muslims there was Christians there, and they just needed to try to figure out a way to kind of hang out. And that didn't go well. And, Kosovo happened. I'll never forget Kosovo for the rest of my life. That was a bloodbath. It was so gross.
Yeah, I was going to, the Kosovo stuff's something we should probably touch on here before we go to the next section. But I also wanted to, I forget if you had touched on, Shawn, the initial, I think you touched on it briefly, the how much the U.S. government then supported Yeltsin to get him to win his second election, and how much that like doubled down the economic consolidation of like the means of production and the economy being owned by these oligarchs and mobsters essentially. And then too, how that also kind of like paved the way for what we'll get to later, which kind of paved the way for then Putin to come to power in the first place, which is just like I remember Scott talking about this when I had him on a couple weeks ago. He's like, it's a really simple syllogism. Like Bill Clinton puts in Boris Yeltsin, and then Clinton supporting Yeltsin directly leads to Vladimir Putin. So it's like anytime people want to freak out like Putin's the devil, just like throw it back in their face. Like, yeah, Bill Clinton put him there basically.
Well, the reason he supported Yeltsin so much is because otherwise the other way was going to be the communist oligarchs coming back through, which is who Yeltsin overthrew twice when they tried to axe him out of there. He chased him out of town 2 times at this point, with most likely U.S. help.
Right, but then it was like basically it backfired anyway, because after he won, basically all the oligarchs, were essentially back in, power anyway, in a sense, because they had helped to basically fund him in there. And they were like, I forget the section where like they're like threatening the new like foreign minister and like saying like, you're gonna put our guys in there or you're just not gonna be the minister anymore, right? Like and that's a direct result of US intervention.
U.S. intervention is the root of everything that is evil at this point. And I'm not even afraid to say that, Sorry if YouTube takes your show down for saying something like that.
Yeah, it's right here. It's the payoff where he said Yeltsin appointed nickel oligarch Vladimir Potanin as Minister of the Economy and Deputy Prime Minister, and thievery only grew. Alexander Lifshitz, the new finance minister, later told journalist Alexander Gentelev that he was summoned to a meeting with the oligarchs, and they told him, "We brought Yeltsin to power. The country belongs to us, and you'll do what we tell you." And he asked them, "What is it you want from me?" And he said, they gave me a list of demands, which included consultation with them about all decisions and the appointments of ministry personnel with their consent and so on. And then he asked, like, what happens if I don't do it? And it's like, you'll no longer be minister. Yeah, everything's fine. All right, let's go into Kosovo quick then. Let's
do it.
Anything.
So then I'm passing it along.
Excellent. Hey, everybody. Welcome, Kyle. If I may, before we start, I just haphazardly asked for media credentials for AmFest this week, and I got accepted. So I have no idea what I'm going to ask a bunch of people who believe in supporting Israel for 4 days, what their thoughts are, but we'll see how that goes. So I'll see if I make it out of there unscathed. But so we're going to start with the Rambouillet, and I hope, Kyle, you can sprinkle in all the things. So in honor of Dave Brockie, if anyone knows Dave Brockie, there was a heavy metal band, I think Sean would know him, called Gwar.
Yes.
And basically they used to like yell their name, right? Well, basically think of this next section is basically that without the G. So it's just war. I mean, never trust a person who has a brooch for every different occasion. I got to be honest. Madeline's War. Let's start with there. The Rambouillet Agreement.
You talking about
like
Madeleine
US
Albright?
NATO's like, what's that?
Madeleine Albright.
Yes.
Yeah, she's
exactly.
Anyways.
And she's gonna come up like a boil, like turning up like a bad penny throughout this for a little bit here. So we have this agreement where US and NATO, they're exactly a boil. So they have this agreement where US and NATO's like, hey, let us just occupy your land for you. And Milosevic like, no, thank you. So they said, we don't like that. So we're just going to start bombing you. Kyle, can you give it shade a little bit more? I just kind of put the outlines there. Please shade and color in if you may.
No, I mean, I think you're doing a good job. I'll let you keep going, and I could jump in with some thoughts in a minute, but I'll let you keep going and fill in a little bit more details.
Sounds great. So thank you. So basically, that didn't do so well. So basically, we started occupying, Serbia and Kosovo and Yugoslavia and everything, and that's basically they became under protectorate of NATO. So imagine if they're on the border of Russia at this point. Imagine there was some conflict there, and NATO's there. It automatically draws them into some conflict, and you just see them encroaching more and more and more sitting on top of Russia's space. They're just looking for that little conversation space. So NATO expands. We have 1999. We have Poland, Czech, and is it Hungary, I think, joined NATO. So once again, these are the 3 countries they initially said no, right? This is before the Ukrainian red line. So now they're like no, and now they're in. And here comes NATO expanding. Then we get the Balkan Wars. So after the agreement, we're looking at the Balkan conflicts, and this is just where this is all the 90s stuff, right? The role of NATO in Bosnian War and the Kosovo War. They are the broader conflict, U.S. foreign policy. Let's just do it. We'll just sweep everybody out. And then after that, we have the Chechen Wars. So we've got the Russia military campaigns in Chechnya, the international implications, and they're discussed where the U.S. foreign policy indirectly influenced Russian actions. So it's, once again, this book, to Shawn's point, is called Provoked. It's not justified per Scott's point. It's provoked. They have said time and time again, this is unprovoked, and we're finding puzzle pieces saying something to the contrary. So I'd love for you guys to jump in.
Yeah, I had a section here highlighted that I thought summed up Kosovo fairly well from Scott. It's on page 108 in his section titled Illegal. He writes, on March 12th, 1999, Poland, Hungary, and Romania were officially admitted into the supposedly purely defensive NATO alliance. Just 12 days later, NATO launched a 78-day air war against Serbia to guarantee the independence of Kosovo. That war, called Operation Allied Force, was based on the outright lie that the Serbs had massacred 100,000 Kosovo Albanian civilians and the threat that they were sure to obliterate the rest. In launching that war, Clinton sided with the Kosovo Liberation Army, or the KLA, a violent insurgent group which had been funded by communists and the sons of fascist militias supported by Italy in World War II, though by 1998 they were better described as heroin dealers and bin Ladenite terrorists. President Clinton bypassed the UN Security Council, where Russia had inherited the USSR seat and veto power, and instead waged war on his own and NATO's pretended authority. Clinton did not even bother to seek authorization from the Congress, official declaration of war as required by the U.S. Constitution, before a bombing campaign, where H.W. Bush began the Iraq War in 1991 to enforce U.S. resolutions demanding the reversal of Iraq's illegal invasion of the separate sovereign state of Kuwait, and reluctantly obtained an authorization from Congress. Clinton was watching this war with no authorization from anyone. And so it just goes in and he explains how this war happened for the U.S. for absolutely no reason. Scott has a lot of details in here about how the U.S. was allied with Al-Qaeda in this conflict that I think is really important. And it's kind of like his section later in the book that we'll get to on the Ukrainian Nazis, where he does a really thorough job of documenting this. That way, when people say, oh, it's overstated, or these really weren't the Al-Qaeda guys that later knocked down our towers, Scott really details how these were the same guys. Now on Kosovo, Scott, I think, has a great summary here on page 122. He writes, despite all their claims about the success of American space-age superpower ability to coerce behavior with precision airstrikes, a post-war study by the military determined that despite dropping tens of thousands of bombs on Kosovo and Serbia, NATO had only destroyed 14 tanks, 18 armored personnel carriers, and 20 artillery pieces. 58 successful strikes out of more than 20,000 bombs dropped. Clark's Air Force had been completely fooled by Serbia's cardboard tank force deployed to distract them. As James Bovard noted, at the end of the war, the Serbian military was largely unscathed, but the country's civilian infrastructure was in ruins. NATO bomb fragments were far more effective against women, children, hospitals, and retirement homes than they were against soldiers. And so that's major. And then, of course, Scott details at the end here how this was really big for the Russian people, understanding that NATO really is an offensive threat to them. The timing of this coming right after NATO expansion, I think, was all the sign that the Russian people really needed. And then a couple more notes on Chechnya here is just, again, the real documentation of the terrorist involvement in the Chechen war on the side of the Americans here. And of course, how all this helps Putin's rise to power. And so, this makes a lot of sense, right? If your country is being humiliated, economically, on, within your own spheres of influence by another country, and your leader is a drunkard who can't even show up to work and who is owned and is corrupt, then a strong man like Vladimir Putin, who talks so positively about the history of Russia and shows to have, you could hate Putin for this, but just understand, if you were a Russian citizen, the way he talks about Russia is just as inspiring as an American politician giving a rousing speech about George W. Bush, or not George W. Bush, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. That's the way he talks about Russia. And so that, understanding that the humiliation of Russia is absolutely going to lead to a strong Russian nationalist to come to power in Moscow. And Putin's a very calculating man, so he didn't act like a bull once he got in and immediately waged war against NATO over Kosovo or in Albania or in any of these wars that we talk about. Now, he was absolutely brutal to the Chechens, right? So we had the Americans, basically doing to the Chechens what we did to the Shias and the Kurds in Iraq following the first Iraq war, right? Where we encourage, we agitate, we try to get them to rise up against the central power. And then once the central power hits back, we just leave them to completely get decimated time and time again. Because overall, in the grand scheme of geopolitics, what's 10,000 Kurdish lives for a propaganda point in Washington against Saddam Hussein? And I think the same thing was true with Moscow when we look at Chechnya.
Excellent points. Yeah. So I'll continue just a couple more points, if I may. The next point is the missile defense systems. We cover that point. Scott covers it very extensively. The U.S. withdraws from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 under George W. Bush. They planned for missile defense systems in Eastern Europe, in countries like Poland, Czech Republic, which are direct threats to Russian security. And Russia's sitting there like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, we need them against, I believe they said Iran. And they're like, you need them against Iran over here? And then they even offered places that they could help them, and they just turned them down and said, no, we're good putting them here. So obviously you had Russian reactions, including threats to counter with their own missile deployments and say, the more you keep pushing on us, and they keep saying it over and over again, they're not hiding what they're saying. Russia's very clear with their threat. They feel slightly threatened. They're like, you guys keep coming, that's going to cause us to react, don't you think? Every time. And we just keep pushing and pushing. And then lastly, there were assassinations and espionage. And there were various incidents with Russian assassinations, espionage activities. So that is the end of mine. And I will pass it off to Jacob for some summarization and continuation of his part.
Alrighty. And sorry, I'm switching the format on everyone. I'm just trying to... I initially had stuff set up for 3 and I realized, no, we got 4. So I'm just trying to make it fill up the screen a little bit better. All right. So I have from, let's see, where did I start? I know where I ended. I ended pretty much
Color Revolution.
I had the Color Revolution all the way up to Rose Wilted NATO Round 2. So there's a lot to cover here. I guess theme of a lot of this section is that the U.S. is back, which, I'm glad this only happened in the past and doesn't happen anymore, that the U.S. backed all these regime changes disguised as democratic reforms. And this was done through the creation of NGOs. And so there's like the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, the NDI, IRI, I think there's a few other ones as well. And so now they wouldn't overtly, so they were overt, but they had to still make it kind of cute, right? So they're like, well, we're not endorsing candidates. We're just kind of endorsing civilized society, right? Like a polite society, just all things good in society and these different things. So they would generally go into places where they don't like someone who's in charge. He doesn't align with American interests. He doesn't align with mud democracy trademark. And they would do heavy funding of opposition parties. They would do media campaigns. They would do these really manipulative what are they called, like the where they the polls, right? So they'd poll people post voting, and they'd come up with like, hey, the results actually supposed to be this, and the reporting of the votes is actually not matching up with it. So we think that there might be some election fraud going on, misinformation, so to speak. Again, none of this has anything, no corollaries to any modern things going on, both, whether it's here in America or elsewhere. So they had a lot of successes with this strategy early on: Albania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Romania, and then this set the stage for more interventions in the future. We had Slovakia. That was, I think, primarily done by so you had the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. You have also, there's a whole section in here about Soros and his involvement in a lot of this stuff, including in Slovakia. And Scott kind of goes out of his way to kind of like just dispel yes, we can talk about Soros and his, sort of like a stateless statesman heavily involved in all this stuff. And no, you don't have to talk about it and, fall into conspiracy theory, the Jews or anything like that when you're talking about it. But they ousted Vladimir Mikar. Hopefully that's how you pronounce it. It's in 1998, and they used a lot of the tactics I talked about. They even funded like rock concerts. They had TV ads. They mobilized quote unquote grassroots events, try to mobilize youth turnout. And again, they used this sort of exit polling to discredit the official result and to pressure a coalition government. And so then the outcome is that Mikuláš Zurinda replaced Mikar. And so this was a model for future interventions as well. We get to, we have Croatia. You had Tudjman, and he was once a U.S. ally. Again, that's just a one-off thing, not a pattern of anything to come where we turn on people we used to fund and support. But he became a target after his policies diverged from Western interests. So they formed what was called GONG, Citizens Organized to Monitor Elections. This was to coordinate election interference. And there were Slavic operatives like Pavel Dames or Demise. They were trained Croatian opposition leaders. And the outcome of that was pro-Western leaders coming to power. The bulldozer revolution in Serbia. U.S. ousted Slobodan, Milosevic. I think it's how you say that. Yeah, Milosevic. Yeah. I'll just mute myself every time I say it.
It's so Milosevic. Yeah, that's the big one.
Pretty good.
It's spelled so different than it sounds, but it's Milosevic. It's the one that sounds familiar but doesn't look it.
Yeah. That's again, Soros is involved here with a group called Otpor, which means resistance. And $40 million in funding going to parallel vote tabulations and protests, more grassroots stuff, more exit polling. So we see a pattern coming up here. I don't know if anyone wants to comment more on any of those revolutions I talked on, any of the
I'd love to jump in. I think it's really interesting about the rock concert aspect of it. We're seeing Scott and Mike Benz cyber online, right? Mike Benz, he talked about how they use rock concerts to distract and to draw people in. They get in this rhythm and it helps build them up and gin up their power and everything. And once again, we talk about Broche Lady, Madeleine Albright. She was one of the ones in one of those revolutions where did the Black Fist come from BLM? Oh my gosh, it came from one of the revolutions in the Eastern European breakaways. So there were even pictures of Madeleine Albright with the black fist, and it was Madeleine Albright. They spray painted her face on it. So it was pretty funny at that point.
She's an evil
of
woman.
course.
Everything
Oh,
her
dude.
name was on. She's about as bad as Margaret Thatcher. Swear to God. Her name, between her and Margaret Thatcher. I mean, obviously one's here and one's in Britain, but like, well, she's not in Britain anymore. You should have seen the celebrations by the British when Margaret Thatcher died, though. I could post a video about Ding Dong, the witch is dead and all that stuff. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah, there's a few other interventions that we could talk about. I don't want to necessarily go into all of them. There was like still stuff going on over in former Yugoslavia, but I want to jump ahead to the section that was called "There's Always NATO," and so this was kind of like Scott wrapping up sort of the Bill Clinton section before we get to George Bush, and you had the section called "There's Always NATO," so talking about how there continued to be the addition of more European nations continuing to break the promises that they had made in the 90s, which, as we talked about last week, this was all like, just because they weren't written down doesn't mean that they weren't important, because the whole thing that led to German reunification was predicated on the very explicit promises made by multiple people. I think last week I had like 7 explicit promises from 7 different people in, between the American administration, the Germans, the British, all saying we're not going to go one inch eastward, we're not going to put weapons over here, et cetera, and then naming out specific countries we're not going to add. So you guys have already talked about how that promise has been broken, and these moves, along with all the economic interventions and just like living conditions in Russia, really soured Russia's perception, like the population's perception of America. They basically got to the point where they were like, all right, like democracy, capitalism, all this, like we're not down with this. This is just making us like puppets of American interests. We're just being exploited, and they were ready for something different, you could say, as well as the expanding of NATO, into spaces they said they weren't going to be. So this all leads to, as I talked about, I think I hinted at earlier, that you have Putin starting to consolidate power, and he's initially the prime minister, and then he is appointed. So he's appointed then to the presidency by, what's his name?
Yeltsin.
Yeah, having a brain fart. And initially, just it's funny because there's so many times where America is like pro something that's happening. They later come to they wouldn't admit it now, but yeah, they were all like pro Putin at the very beginning and thinking that he was going to continue to be a reformer, that he was going to bring stability, stuff like that. There's a section here. So right from the beginning, the making of Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to try to find it in the midst of my chicken scratch here, because Scott says something really. Here we go. Yeah. So I'm going to start. It starts on another page. In 2000, Boris Fyodorov explained that though Putin might consolidate power at the expense of organized crime, the man was no angel. Everyone expected him to purge the family that made him. Fyodorov wrote, but it doesn't mean that anybody today in Russia thinks that Putin is a great reformer, that Putin is a great Democrat, that Putin is ideologically motivated, idealist, or anything like that, because he's clearly not. But Mikhail Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin are now widely hated and reviled in Russia as villains and traitors for selling out the country to America. And by then, virtually the entire national consensus was that democracy was a failure. The word itself became a curse. The men who led Russia's transition from communism, with much assistance from their American friends, had blown it. And if a strong man could give them their dignity back, they would let him. So, any comments on that before
I'm going to chime in right now. What the hell did you expect those people to think? Honestly, seriously. Oh, between Gorbachev and Yeltsin, who were reformists, they were trying to like play ball with the West or whatever, and they got played like a fiddle. Not only when the promises were broken with the NATO, saying, nobody's coming closer. They came closer. And then all of a sudden, NATO is carpet bombing Slavic states, which are touching Russian borders. Are you kidding me? And then they come back and they destroy the economy. They destroy them economically. What are people supposed to think? That they're not wrong. I don't know. Like, I don't care if I catch hell for this. They're not wrong. They got screwed by the Americans and or NATO both, and they're mad. And so they're going to go with the guy who says they're going to stick up. He's going to stick up for them, protect them from these people, and he's living up to his word now. It's plain and simple. I mean, I don't know what else to say to folks.
Yeah. Well, the last paragraph in the Clinton section basically says something I think Kyle alluded to earlier, which is that Russian patriotism is a powerful force, often compared to America's own sense of their country's special destiny. They did not react well to being robbed blind, starved, and threatened, especially by their longtime foreign rival. Instead of heeding the lessons, we talked about this last week, of Versailles, and treating our defeated foes with respect, President Clinton kicked the Russians while they were down, sowing extreme deprivation and resentment that lasts to this day, setting the stage for the rise of Vladimir Putin. And again, I mean, I'm a bleeding heart ANCAP. So on one hand, like, I could get into a purity spiral and say, well, I wouldn't have liked it if America had been friendly to Russia, because then they just would have, been really friendly, and it would have been statism, and like, it would have been like, I could go down that purity spiral, or I can live in the real world and go, you know what, like, we wouldn't be on the precipice of World War III. I mean, I don't want to be dramatic because I don't actually think that, but the point is we're way closer than we should be to that. And there'd be just a lot less innocent people being killed, right? If we had actually done a legitimate effort towards collaborating with Russia, towards bringing them into sort of like the quote unquote West, actually doing things good for the good of their economy and not just for the good of American hegemony, American interests. So, anyone else? Kyle, Shawn, Mark, anyone want to add any more to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything Shawn said earlier, and just to add all the color-coded revolutions and the fact that anytime there's an election where the results are the opposite of what the Americans want, they cancel it, including in Russia, or the fact that in particularly 1996, the Americans rigged the election for Boris Yeltsin in a way that, is 10 times the conspiracy that Russiagate was even alleged to be. Of course, Russiagate is all fake, but even if every word of Russiagate was true, what we overtly did, what Time Magazine reported the Americans did in Moscow in 1996 is so much worse than Russiagate. And so why would Russians think elections are a good idea if it's just apparently the way America controls the world? And I think this is actually one of the most important sections of the book, because once you read this, you're never going to not be able to see these things happening in real time. We just saw two this past year, at least, Venezuela and in Georgia. The Americans forced the Venezuelan government to hold elections. They held elections, and then after the elections are done, they declared a different winner and said, we have this independent Carter Center that tells us that the opposition actually won the election. When meanwhile, the Carter Center is funded by the State Department, right? This is exactly the same things that were going on in the 1990s and the 2000s. The same thing is happening right now today in Georgia, where they're, getting all the young people all roused up and in the streets. And of course, I think it's happening right now, probably because the CIA is worried that Donald Trump may not sign off on these operations, and they have a friendly year right now with Joe Biden. So we're seeing these things happen. Now, just one more thing. I had this under my Bush section, so I forgot to mention earlier when Jacob did. But he mentioned the destruction of the nuclear treaties under the Bush era, and particularly the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Now, this is one of the most important things, because what the U.S. does is, after we get out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, we put the Aegis Ashore missile defense system in Poland and Romania. And this actually ends up happening under the George Bush administration towards the end of it, but getting out sets it up. And the reason that this is so important is because that missile defense treaty system, while missile defense system, the Aegis Ashore, it can also fire Tomahawk cruise missiles, which the U.S. does have the capability to put a nuclear warhead in. And so this is effectively Russia putting launchers into Mexico or Canada that could fire nuclear warheads at the United States of America. Obviously, this is completely intolerable to Russia. And this is, again, when we're talking about Provoked, of course, Scott does a really good job of detailing the million little provocations towards Russia, all these color revolutions, all this major economic warfare that certainly do add up to a lot. But then there are these just major events too, like the destruction of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, and then putting the Aegis Ashore missile system in Poland and Romania.
Let me add a little bit of context to that, because you're so right. But what makes that more impactful is that, like, you see how, like, and again, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not saying Putin is an angel. I think we all as libertarians know here that it just does not, these situations rarely boil down to good guy versus bad guy. It's a lot more nuanced than that, than a sort of like Saturday morning cartoon version of history and conflicts that go on. But for all of Putin's character flaws, for all the libertarian critiques we could throw at him, post 9/11, Putin really still was trying to build a friendly relationship with America and the West. Like, he was like, hey, listen, Russia could have, and Putin knows this, right? He could have just said, hey, 9/11, well, you had that coming. You guys have been messing, around, mucking a buck over here in former Yugoslavia and Bosnia and all this, supporting the Mujahideen over here, basically creating the sort of like foraging ground, the sort of like petri dish that then formed Al-Qaeda, that formed those who would do 9/11. Our intelligence agencies had opportunities, as Scott goes into and explains, to pick this stuff before it ever happened, and not only ignored it, but like we continually went, no, we're supporting them. They're helping us, right? Like we're not going to label them terrorists. There was that section, I don't think we touched on it, but where Clinton said, like, oh, we owed them one, right? So we're going to support them over here, even though we're still building these bases in Saudi Arabia and, blockading and throwing bombs into Iraq and whatnot. Like, that's what they're upset about. We're not going to change that, but we're just going to, help them with some other stuff over there and hope they forget about it, which is just crazy. But to get back to Putin is, like, very gracious after 9/11, says, like, we want to help you, we want to support you. Then even after they start, they throw the treaty out and they're going to like build these missile systems in Poland. So then, Putin's like, all right, well, this seems like a problem. And he's like, well, if you're concerned about, like the official explanation was to have systems in place to thwart missile strikes from Iran. And then Putin's like, all right, well, Iran doesn't have missiles that you need to worry about right now. And if you ever did, we would have a heads up on them because we would see them testing them before they ever used them. And so you'd have time to build those systems before they ever became an actual threat. But he's like, listen, how about we just partner on this? How about if you're concerned about Iran, it's like, fine, let's make this a joint American-Russian project where we work together to sort of like create systems that are aimed at defending all of Europe from potential threats in Iran. And I think so. He had the one idea. Well, he suggested they put stuff in the Mediterranean or Italy, or saying that I forget which. I'm trying to find where he said it.
Didn't he let him borrow a base? Didn't he
Yeah,
offer one
he
of
was
his own
offering that.
bases
I'm trying to
Yeah.
find.
in
He was offering.
Kazakhstan or something?
He at
Yeah,
least
he was-
offered. Yeah.
Yeah, I
can't
think
find the-
they let them use the K2 base in Uzbekistan, which was a former Soviet base, which I think was actually a nightmare for the Americans. But, you know, Jacob makes a really good point that after 9/11, Putin offered to help the Americans. It's not as if, you know, he exploited this opportunity or did what the Americans probably would have done, which is after the Americans went to Afghanistan, he would have started backing the Taliban against them. You know, that's certainly what Washington would have done if the roles were reversed. You know, it's interesting that Putin tries to help and sees it as an opportunity to really, I think, make Russia a part of the West. And instead, Russia is just once again rejected.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
just,
to that point, Kyle, if I may, to that point, you're talking about the all of us, all of America supported all the terrorism in Afghanistan against Russia in the 80s. And
Yes.
then in the 90s, we support the terrorists and we globalize it, right? The Bin Ladenite is globalized, right? The globalization of Bin Ladenite or whatever. And now, then they attack us. And what was there? One of their things where some of the younger troops are like, why are we training against America? Because they had so much support from America. And even through all of that against Russia, Putin extends the hand because he knows terrorism equals bad. And he wants to defeat that, and he wants to work together with America. He thinks it's a great opportunity to consolidate, collaborate, work together, and they box him out again. And if I may, one other thing to watch: Bringing Down a Dictator was about about one of the revolutions with Madeleine Albright and the Fist and Otpor. Mike Benz. It's an hour-long documentary, but Mike Benz has it on Twitter, and it's like a 3.5-hour breakdown of a 1-hour documentary by Mike Benz. It is so fascinating to watch how they manipulate and how they work crowds and how they got all this stuff to coordinate.
yeah, yep. And I did find the part where it says that you know, I just had it and I lost it again. Ugh, this book's too big and my mic's like right in front of it. But yeah, there was a base in man, I just had it and I lost it again. I should have got my finger out. Oh yeah, the Gabala radar station in Azerbaijan. And yeah, the interceptors would then be able to be placed closer to Iran at sea or in Turkey or Iraq, where America still had a lot of troops there because at this time we're already in Afghanistan and Iraq. Anyway, the point all there being that Putin, and again, not to make Putin an angel, but it's just like, put it this way, the amount of restraint he's showing towards the actions that NATO and America are doing in his neck of the woods is not reciprocal to what American officials would do in similar situations. And I think that discrepancy alone makes the propaganda of like this, you know, war in Ukraine being a unprovoked attack. And we haven't gotten, you know, to 2014 or some of the really spicy stuff yet. But but we should get to, before we run out of time here, the Rose.
We haven't even started Obama.
I mean, what about there was the Orange Revolution in 0405? You know,
Well,
that nobody really talked about.
The book doesn't bring up the Orange Revolution, I think, till after the Rose. I think that's
it is a little bit later.
Because
okay.
I ended on NATO round 2, and right after NATO round 2 was the Orange Revolution. So
that's correct. Yeah, that's where I had it split. So
yep. So we'll talk about the Orange Revolution next week. Yep. But we'll end on the last two sections that were here. So we had so this is where the George Soros section was, which I kind of already alluded to, and then we have, but that was all part of the Rose Revolution, which So pull up my notes here because otherwise I'm just.
And
gonna
remember, you were
book, and
talking
that's
too,
too
Jacob,
long.
the NED and everything. Look who's heading these groups. Wasn't John McCain head of the I? Was it the INI? And who was the head of the other group? I mean, complete neocon.
Yep.
Just absolute crazy people who want to bomb everything
I don't
at
think
the
people
time, at
realize
least.
that when we say that, like John McCain is responsible for like the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Like it's not just like oh he had a bad voting record, right? It's like no, this guy is absolute like just the worst. Like one of like, uh, which is why I like when I became very aware of all of this stuff going on is what led me to be a Democrat, because I just looked at like John McCain and I was just like, and what he represented it, and it was I didn't know I missed the Ron Paul moment back in the day, so uh, unfortunately that wasn't an option for me at the time. But yeah, so the Rose Revolution, uh, sorry, I have like way too many windows open right now. So this was going on in Georgia under President Edward Shevnad Shevardnadze, I think is how you say it.
Srebrenica.
Shevardnadze. That's not how.
Yeah,
See, I'm listening to like an audio thing and it
I know it.
mispronounces it.
I think it's
Um,
Srebrenica, something like that.
Shevardnadze. But he had again been a U.S. Man, this is just a weird pattern, right? A U.S. ally in the early 1990s, receiving lots of Western financial aid. That's so weird. But fell out of favor in Washington due to his policies that were strengthening ties with Russia. So he was making deals with Gazprom about like the pipeline, like the gas pipelines and stuff. And so basically, like they were going to be buying a lot of their oil and gas and stuff from Russia. And they were not open to Georgia integration with NATO, and they were addressing Chechen insurgents on Russian terms, and so he was just more aligned with Moscow. But listen, I'm sure that these Western leaders who preach so much about self-determination and democracy were totally fine with this government, this country near Russia, deciding that they just wanted to cooperate more with their neighbor than with this other country halfway across the world, right? Obviously not. And um, so some key players also. There was Ambassador Richard Miles, and he was also involved in the Serbian bulldozer revolution. And he was sent to Tbilisi to lead the U.S. effort to depose help me out, Mark Shevardnadze.
Srebrenica,
Shevardnadze.
something like
I'll
that.
remember. Yeah, okay, Shevardnadze.
It's all right, man. We're all trying this together. This is a
Are you
great
sure
book to
you're not
learn like
Russian,
8
Mark? Are you
languages.
sure? You
I
know
know,
all these
right?
things way too good. Are you sure you're not Russian?
Dude, I mean, I will put
I am
my
looking for this. I do not know for what you're talking about, please.
they
Oh my
accuse
God, you
me
even
of
have the accent.
as much as they accuse me of taking Kremlin money. I'm like, listen, I got 5 kids. If the Kremlin wants to give me money, I will give them my Venmo, my Cash App, my like. Go ahead, right? um, Soros was funding the Liberty Institute, which was a Georgian opposition group. You had Otpar, again, that's Serbian revolutionaries. You had the key opposition leader was Mikhail Saakashvili. And he was a former justice minister of Georgia. But again, they're doing kind of the same stuff they'd already tried out. A lot of the propaganda, the media ads, the putting the the money in, the grassroots movement and protests and whatnot. They were mobilizing street teams to go and like do graffiti protests and stuff, and like put the symbols of these different groups. The NDI was heavily involved in this. It's the National Democratic Institute. Yeah, you gotta love the name. By the way, you gotta love the names of these organizations, right? Like it's just like I think I forget what show Scott was on the other day where the host compared it to like it's like gender affirming care. It's like you're just begging the question with these organizations, like like you name it very good organization. Well, obviously they're named very good organization. They only do good things. Um, yeah. Exit poll manipulation was still very present in this. So the outcome of this of the Rose Revolution so like they didn't quite win the election, but Shevardnadze was still like going to be, so there's going to be like a coalition government, but he was still going to be the head. But then the U.S. government, all the people involved, the different NGOs and stuff, were just basically like, this election was rigged, and stuff like that, and put so much pressure on him, and so then he resigned under this immense external pressure. And he called the coup a victory for democracy, which is pretty funny. But then the next guy they installed, that was Saakashvili, then wins the 2004 elections with 97% of the vote. I'm sure that election was totally fair and free. Nothing to see here. Everything is fine. And now everything's right with the world because all these Eastern countries are now aligning with the West, and Russia's being completely isolated. And I'm sure that treating Russia as this bad guy that we shouldn't get along with is not going to be any type of self-fulfilling prophecy in the least. So, there's a lot more we could go into about that, but that's kind of where I ended, was the Rose Revolution. Is there any other points in that section anyone want to talk about, or anything that came to people's minds in that spot?
I like that. Well, I don't like, but the fact that the olive branch was extended by 3 different presidents of Russia at this point. And not only were they shot down, they were shot down, spit on, and kicked on, and bent over. Like this is a fact. Like the last three presidents they've had have tried to work with the United States and or NATO. They really did. The fact that Russia extended an olive branch after 9/11 was a very huge deal because our so-called quote unquote allies like Israel didn't do a damn thing. Probably because
that's not true. That's not true. They danced in the streets about it.
Well, I mean, they were in on it too, but that's a totally different podcast. Get me going.
Benjamin Netanyahu said, "This is great."
Yeah. I mean, oh my God, we should probably do a podcast on 9/11 someday. But I digress. Anyways, promises were made, promises were broken, the economy was destroyed, olive branches were still extended to the United States. They spit in their face. Why is it a surprise that Russia is upset at this point? Why? It shouldn't be. It's a surprise because the mainstream narrative is saying that Russia is this big bad bully who, invaded this country for whatever reason they decided they want to take the land, right? Well, that's not true. And this book is proving it. And this is why we're doing this, But the fact of the matter is U.S. foreign policy is so vile and so gross that not only have they done this to Russia, not only did they actively give money and weapons to Afghanistan in order to put military bases in Afghanistan while we were at war with them to boot. Wow, right? Now we're actively Zach Attack.
I see what you're laughing at.
But no. Now we're actively funding Al-Qaeda in Syria right now. So please tell me where the United States government is the good guy when it comes to foreign policy. By the way, anybody who has served in the military post 9/11 is probably very, 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 very upset at this moment. And I'm mad too, as should the rest of us be. This is sick. So, hey, if you want to believe the United States is a good guy in all their foreign policy, go ahead. You can live in blissful ignorance. We're here to tell you otherwise. Sorry to be so harsh, but I'm being very honest because I'm tired. I'm tired of this. It's sick. It's gross. People need to wake up.
I agree.
What's interesting about that too? Oh, go ahead, Jacob.
Well, I was gonna say I think it's absolutely like the last section in the NATO round 2 part. Even like the New York Times was writing that, to Russia, the meaning is clear. The alliance still views it as a potential enemy rather than a partner, which goes against what George Bush said post 9/11 when he met with Putin and was like, I looked into his eyes and I saw that he was a good man and all that. And that's my really bad George Bush impression. But he was like, he's like, but I think he's a good guy. I think he's a reformer. I think, and it's like, but that's not how you treated him every step of the way. I mean, it's like, the honey on their lips, the honey of their words going to Putin, like, no, it's all good. It's all good. Don't worry, nothing to worry about. Don't worry about these military bases going up next to your border. Don't worry about NATO expanding. We're all partners. We're all partners. But then it's just like every step of the way, the actions are communicating, we don't like you. We're never going to like you. You're never going to be part of our team. You're never going to, it's kind of like, continuing to bully a kid at school who just wants to sit at your table, except this kid has nukes. So
yeah,
not a great,
I guess
not a great plan.
The one thing I would add to that, Jacob, and the one thing that I feel like so far I've really taken away from the first about 150 pages of this book that I guess I kind of knew before, but I didn't realize how much this was the case. It's not just like, those nice words and the things like the Partnership for Peace or the European Russian Alliance, like all these different groups that they come up with, all these different proposals that they come up with. It's not necessarily that they're just stupid. Is that it's a con, right? That they're tricking the Russians. And Sky kind of lays it out in the first section that there's some concern early on, particularly in the H.W. Bush and the Clinton years, that if they scare the Russians too much, a new Iron Curtain is going to go up somewhere in Europe. And so they have to really con Russia and get Russia to believe that this isn't their grand plan to expand NATO right up to their borders, to weaken, to threaten Moscow. But that really does seem to be the plan all along. It's just that they had to slow walk it for that reason. And so, yeah, Jacob, they say all these nice words, but that's just a part of the scam. It's just I guess, I kind of assume that H.W. Bush made promises. Clinton broke some of those promises and they made new promise. W. Bush broke those promises and made new promises. And the cycle goes on. But it seems all so much more intentional than that they really knew that the promises that they were making at the time weren't promises that they were going to keep, but rather promises that would get Russia not to have a major reaction at the time. So then they could take a further escalation that they could provoke Russia further down the line.
Yeah, it's all about American hegemony. It's all about, like, it's our security interests. It's about, like, we have to have control over the resources, the oil, the military bases, the security, and it's all about, it's about us, but it's because we're the good guys, because we're the ones who are going to ensure democracy, and by ensure democracy, we mean that all elections around the world go exactly the way we want them to go. It's just absolutely insane. And then when you study this history, and then, like, Scott already brought it up, I think, in the first section about, like, they do all this and then they want to, let's just, like, for a minute think that, like, Russia did heavily influence the 2016 election. And, like, listen, I'm sure Russia maybe tries to influence it somewhat, but it's like, what hypocrisy to be like, how dare they, right?
Couldn't endorse Kamala, for goodness sake.
Yeah, like, what hypocrisy to be like, oh, like, how, like we're so high and mighty, like, we would never funnel money and misinformation and NGOs and stuff into another country to have some kind of impact on their elections. I mean, it's just, it would be funny if it wasn't so depraved and evil. So, and I want to read one last little thing here and then kind of give everyone closing thoughts, because this is important. This is the last paragraph of the section, and it pertains to we're moving closer and closer to the crisis in Ukraine. In 2002, NATO published their first NATO-Ukraine action plan, which was different from the more controversial membership action plan, which President Bush attempted to push through at the Bucharest summit in April 2008. Still, this was another step toward further integration between the alliance and Ukraine, setting objectives for the reorganization of Ukraine's armed forces and communication systems for easier integration with allied military forces. But, I forget where it was, someone earlier said, well, like, Russia has nothing to worry about unless they decide to, start doing bad things, which is just as dumb as saying, well, what do you have to fear from the police if you're not doing anything wrong? It's that dumb. It's that dumb. It's like, it's like, well, whatever. Like, why do you care about privacy? Like we just let's just have the military and FBI just put people in our houses, because like if you're not doing anything bad, what do you have to worry about if you got, government military and government intelligence just pointing guns at you and spying you all the time, right? Like, you got something to hide? Anyway, let's go around and everyone give closing thoughts before we hop off here. Okay, Shawn, you go first.
Okay, I will go first. Closing thoughts. Turn off your TV and go do your own research. Get on a podcast, read a book, talk to people outside of the mainstream narrative. They're probably going to have a little more information than the status quo. If you want to live in blissful ignorance, keep watching Fox and CNN. That's what I have to say. If you want to grow your mind and see the way things are, do the things I just said. Otherwise, that's all I got. Follow me at Buds in Reality on all things. It's at Buds letter N Reality. Yes, and Zach Attack says touch grass too. Go outside. Yes, touch grass. Love your family, love your neighbors, love your people. That's the message.
Awesome, love it. Mark, final thoughts?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so we're clearly seeing NATO expansion and at least getting Russia's attention at minimum. Let's just say they're getting Russia's attention. And we haven't even gotten to the land dispute over parts of Ukraine yet. We're not even there yet.
Nope.
Like, we're not even there yet. And look at we could have a final conclusion to our thesis right now and be like, we've got our closing arguments. We're good to go. But wait, there's more. So I'm very excited to look what's forward. Mark Shawn Puls on X and everything. No, I am not a 3-named person who does bad things to people. But I do use my full name just because. But watch us, follow us. Thank you, everyone, for checking this out. It's Buckle Up should be the name of the book. It just be called Buckle Up. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining us, man. It was a great pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Well,
Kyle.
Speaking of what Shawn said, which is don't watch CNN and don't watch your mainstream media, you should be getting at least a bulk of your news from the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com. Kyle, go ahead.
One more thing, if I may. Invite people who disagree with you to watch this stuff. But don't attack them. They're not stupid idiots. You could say, hey, you just might not be informed the way you might not know this information. Please, I welcome you to watch this. Come and join us. Look, there's comments. You can even refute in the comments and we'll look at it and maybe even bring it up. So
we need to make our own NGOs, like National Endowment for Liberty. That's just like a propaganda institution that just puts up Libertarian Institute articles and podcasts on just like TVs, like in random cities and stuff. Kyle, go ahead and your closing thoughts and where people can find you.
Yeah, I mean, guys, thank you so much for having me. And look, Scott pays me, so I gotta say it, but I don't gotta say it because it's Scott Horton, and if because he pays me, he won't ever require me to say this. This book is really phenomenal. I think it's a really good combination of his first 2 books, Fool's Errand and Enough Already, where it kind of has the same pacing as Enough Already, where it's taking you through the story fairly quickly, where you're learning new things, and at the same time, it has all the same documentation as Fool's Errand. And so the book's absolutely fantastic. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And as I've kind of pointed out through this, enjoy is the wrong word. It's going to infuriate you. But, when you read a book, you want to feel like the most important thing is feeling like you're not wasting your time. And you will not feel like you're wasting your time reading this book. Chapter after chapter, paragraph after paragraph, you're learning new, important information from, the highest place and the most important sources, right? Scott isn't relying on, some off-color websites or things like that to get. It's all the absolute closest he could get to the firsthand sources. So really, really just fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. And so much of what's happening in this book has really important lessons for what's going on today in Syria, in Ukraine, around the world, in Venezuela, anywhere where we're trying to color revolution. And if you guys can, check out my new show, The Kyle Anzalone Show. I really appreciate it.
Yep, and I have Kyle's new show linked in the description of this video here on YouTube, so definitely go check that out. Everyone, wherever you're watching, make sure that you are subscribed to my channel as well as all three of the other gentlemen here on this panel, that their channels as well. Give this video a thumbs up so more people can watch it. I'll, of course, plug again the Libertarian Christian Institute, as the bottom ticker there says. If you appreciate this kind of content and these kind of conversations, LCI is hosting this, and we're a nonprofit, just like so listen, donate to both the Libertarian Institute and the Libertarian Christian Institute. We're all out there trying to promote this very vital message of liberty and peace in this chaotic, dangerous world we live in. And other than that, we'll be back again next week, same time. We probably will be. I'll make sure we're all good for Christmas week. But if there's any changes, we'll make announcements. And other than that, but yeah, they should be, other than maybe not next week if there's an issue, they should be every Mondays going forward. It's past the deadline technically, but as someone I saw, Gunpowder and Vanilla said earlier, we're trying to find that comment. So she is part of the LCI book club that we're doing as part of this whole Provoked series that we're doing. So if you want to have, get even more involved and have some private, conversations and discussions on this book and these sections, we're technically past the deadline if you didn't sign up yet. But this will be the last night I allow it. If you go to find me on Twitter at Biblical Anarchy, message me if you want to join, and I'll get you hooked up. But that's all I have for you guys. All we have for you guys for tonight, and we'll be back soon. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Shawn, for being here and helping us get this together. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Until then, take it easy and be safe.